Hello, I'm David Cartledge.
And I'm Gregory Sioles.
We're glad to have the chance to meet with you virtually as we explore our presentation for the MTNA conference on piano auditions, the inside scoop. So we're going to start with an exploration of what's really happening in an audition. Sometimes the understandings of what's happening in an auditioner's mind and an auditionee's mind are quite different.
David, is it anything like a piano competition where students are you routinely competing with each other?
I think very often for the student who's finishing up high school, the routine of showing up to an audition can feel a lot like the routine that's associated with a competition. But the two events are very, very different indeed. You're not, when you're holding auditions as an audition panel, you're not trying to decide who wins. That's not really the objective at all.
Right, exactly. Um, and do the various parties understand each other very well on this particular setting or this particular activity?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think very often the perspectives of what's happening at the audition are very, very different. For a college faculty, the audition process is uh, it's a routine, and it's a very long routine that happens with sort of regularity every year and often on several occasions in the spring. And for the high schooler who's auditioning to get ready for college, this is a big event that's dominating their life and their future.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Um, I think a lot of this conversation that we're going to have today is going to be to let them know where we're coming from, I suppose. And that's really the burden of the whole presentation.
And what's going on in the audition panel's mind is largely the question of, as each prospective student comes in, the faculty member is saying to themselves, do I want to teach this student? Is this someone that I'm going to be able to work with?
No, exactly so. And it's a long-term commitment. It's a 4-year commitment. It's not just whether I can teach them in a master class and successfully get them to do something I would hope that they could do, but whether they will be successful in the degree itself. A lot of that I find is also very intuitive, how you respond to someone who is actually sitting in front of you and playing the piano, and how they comport themselves, both the positive and the negative side of it. I mean, um, uh, how they adapt to a piano, for example, how they whether they do, if they show this particular kind of sensitivity towards a particular style of music, and that sort of thing.
What the auditionee wants to do is to show their potential to be a good student.
Right. And I think it's really important that they show who they are, that they show the real them rather than what they think we want to see as a committee or a panel, because I think that can get you into trouble. You know, I have to be this kind of a virtuoso player of this kind of music or what have you. Uh, no, best to show their real strong side, their real what they love most. In fact.
I think very often students feel that they want to bring into auditions pieces that have been polished over a couple of years and sort of played in recitals and competitions, and they're locked and they're rock solid. And sure, I mean, we want to see you play well, but not if it's at the expense of a piece that's taken you 2 years to get to that level. In a degree, you don't have time to take 2 years to polish up a piece. So we want to know that you can learn pieces in a more reasonable time frame of a few months and get them to performance level. And if it would take you 2 years to get to that level, that's a worry for us.
So how is for example, how is an audition different from a recital performance, and how should they prepare differently? Do you think?
The Perhaps one of the biggest things to keep in mind is that, when you're playing a recital, there's a set time of day, there's a set process, you have a chance typically to rehearse on the piano. And so when you play a recital, you're in control of a great many elements of what's going to be going on. When you're playing in an audition, you're not even necessarily in control of exactly when you play. You have some kind of expectation, but the day, the piano, the room, everything is controlled by other people.
Mhm, mhm. That's a really important point. I think we often don't even feel in control on recital days because nerves can hit you in a certain way and that kind of thing.
Good point.
But but here, everything is really up for grabs in a sense, and so you have to really kind of roll with it and just be aware of it. I guess
So how do you manage that? How do you roll with it? What do you do?
it's a matter of getting your head in the right place, right?
Hmm.
And uh, I think that's going to probably be different for different individuals. But yeah, the way I would do it for myself, and just reaching back into my deep past and when I was doing auditions, is have some positive thoughts, talk myself through in some positive ways to realize, yes, I can do this. I'm prepared. I've been working for this. I'm ready to go, and just allowing the rest to kind of take place when it does,
Hmm.
and just being aware that schedules are not necessarily hard and fast, and they're not going to you can't count
Oh,
on.
it's not unusual for an audition committee to run very late. You want to be in a place where that's not going to throw you off your game. So you just got to be prepared that stuff's going to change.
Yeah, conversely, it can happen the other way. You might have somebody who drops out at the last minute or doesn't
Mhm.
show up, and then all of a sudden, your committee chair will come out into the hallway and say, "Are you ready to play now?"
Yeah. You can feel, I mean, as you see the parade of people before you and the people waiting to play after you, you can feel a little bit like a cog in a machine. And I suppose it's important to realize that for all of us, it's much, much more personal than that. It is absolutely the case that we care about every single student who comes in front of us. For every student who comes in front of us, we're evaluating you as maybe part of our future. And so it matters to us to get the chance to meet you and to get to know you properly and to understand what you're able to do.
When a student walks in the door, what should they do?
Well, it can be unexpectedly important to make sure that we get to know who you are. We want to know your name, and as we go through a routine and go from student to student, you want to make sure no one makes a mistake. So when you enter the room, you want to say hi. My name is whatever your name is, and say where you're from, and that sets a lovely tone and also avoids the possibility of mistaken identity.
They should probably tell you what they're going to play, even though the committee may have it written down. Once again, it goes to the mistaken identity issue a little bit, and it, it's just nice. And I think, frankly, it has a kind of a dual effect of both calming the committee down because of this introduction, and also calming down the player themselves.
Oh, absolutely.
So on to the next step. Once the student has made their introductions, has gone over their repertoire list, whatever is current in their repertoire, then they have to sit at the piano and play that piano, that,
Hmm.
that particular piano. And that can create some issues too, can it?
This is the life of a pianist, but you will not have had a chance to try this particular piano before, and so whatever's going on with it, you're going to have to deal with. In North America, auditions often happen in the depths of winter, and in parts of the country, dry winter air does peculiar things to instruments, and things that might not normally happen might be happening on that day, and you're going to have to handle it. There's
So
something in your favor, though.
yeah, what's that?
the committee will be well aware of whatever the weirdnesses are of the piano that you're going to be playing. So if there's a problem in the treble, or if there's a note that sounds strange, or if there's a bobble in a hammer, they know.
Yeah, exactly so. And important to know that, because I think sometimes when an auditionee actually touches the instrument and the sound is surprising or shocking in some way, uh, they feel like it's my fault. Well, no, it's not. But what you do afterwards, that is something you can control. That is something you can actually make you look good,
Mhm.
because if you adapt well to the instrument, that's very valuable information for anybody listening to you in the room.
So there's a practical question when you're playing an audition, and that is, what do you start with? So, Gregory, how do you choose what to start an audition with, assuming the committee lets you choose?
Well, usually they will. At least in my experience, they always do. And you want to start with something, first of all, that makes you comfortable, allows you to explore the piano and its particular weirdnesses, as you pointed out, so that you can do it without too much disruption to your center, to your feeling in control and comfortable at the instrument. But the other part of it is if you have a program where you really want to play something, you really want to show a particular work, or you have a particular stylistic affinity or affinity towards this particular composer, you want to get it out there probably pretty early. That means you might want to start with it, because once you have played your first piece, the choices are not yours any longer.
So, diving in with Alborada before you figured out how the piano repeats?
Uh, well, that sort of sounds semi-suicidal to me.
Chances are, if you're offering Alborada, they're going to ask for it anyway.
That's true too, and that's an interesting point. There are some pieces that just sort of kind of come right out at you in an audition program.
Yeah,
And
yeah, I
therefore,
know.
you know, yeah,
There are no guarantees, but yes, I think the chances are that if you're offering Alborada, that they're going to want to hear it, and they're going to want to see how you deal with how the piano repeats.
well, that's a big one, right?
And if they know that the piano doesn't repeat, they're not going to count it against you.
That's also true. But they're
Uh,
interested to see nonetheless what you do.
well, and I mean, I've seen auditions where a student, a prospective student, has come in and they've played Alborada and they've had difficulties with the repetition, and I've had colleagues go over and try the piano to see how well it repeats, and had the same difficulty, and there is immediate forgiveness.
Isn't that a nice thing?
Depending on how long your first piece is, it may get heard all the way through. It may not. And uh, I suppose to the degree that there's stopping and starting, there's some commonality with what happens in some competitions, but it's very different from the recital mentality. So, what do you do about being stopped, and how do you handle that?
Well, again, being forewarned is being forearmed, so that you know that it's going to happen. You don't necessarily know when it's going to happen.
Hmm.
And it's a mistake, for example, if you're playing a sonata movement, to think, oh, they're going to stop me at the recap. Well, maybe. That is a kind of a traditional place where juries and such stop a player. But there are no guarantees of that. So don't be trying to second guess them, because then your mind is entirely in the wrong place.
Well, exactly. So, don't wait to be stopped. Play the piece like it's a recital, and it's their job to stop you.
That's right. Leave it to them. Try not to be uh, discomforted by the fact that you're being stopped, but don't anticipate it. Yeah.
So we get to the question of selecting a program and choosing the right repertoire,
Right.
and how to figure out what repertoire is good for you.
You want to show the most of what you can do in a very limited time frame. So you don't want to spend too much time in a piece that, for example, is overly repetitive or stays within the same kind of sound world or pianistic kind of world or expressive world,
Hmm.
because you want to show many facets, not just that you can do one particular thing very well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to be careful to pick pieces that show you to the best advantage as expediently as possible. It's a bad idea to overreach. We'd rather hear a piece that's just right for you. Um, we don't want to hear you wail through the one Chopin etude that's just out of reach for you. If you're not ready to play Winter Wind, then don't. We'd rather hear a less demanding piece played really, really well.
Yeah, exactly so. Um, but continuing to build on that a little bit, one of the other issues, though, and it may seem like almost a contradiction, but I don't think it is that you don't want to play the bare minimum, or you don't want to just present the bare minimum for your audition program. Um, that's noticed by panels as well.
You're being assessed at least partially in terms of what you select and whether it's appropriate and what it shows about the degree to which you're challenging yourself, but doing so reasonably.
That was very nicely put. I think that's, and again, that really goes to the difference between a competition and an audition.
Mm-hmm. At Indiana, at least, um, we never mind if you offer extra pieces. So we have four things we ask for that we'd like you to bring, but if you have some other piece you're playing that you think shows you to good advantage, we don't really have objections if you list that as well. So you should never. Uh, the worst you can do is offer it, and the worst that can happen is it doesn't get heard. But if you're able to play it well, why not put it down? You want to choose repertoire that shows lots of different things that you can do. Choose repertoire that's varied and that shows your versatility.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. The other thing you might want to consider is if you're playing large scale works, that you play and bring all of them prepared, so that
Mm.
it's a big sonata from either the classic or the romantic era. Best to have the whole piece under your fingers.
There are some suites of pieces where it's common to extract out a single movement, but that's not usually the case with something that has the title sonata on the front page.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you're a very advanced pianist and you're playing the Barber Sonata, for example,
Mm-hmm.
don't just bring the fugue. Is that what you're saying?
If you're preparing the Barber Sonata, we would like to hear the other movements as well.
And why is that? I mean, the fugue's the hardest bit, right?
And that's a really interesting question. It is sometimes students manage to construct programs that, for instance, never give the audition committee the opportunity to hear how they balance a line.
Exactly so. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're playing a slow movement, we're going to hear a completely different side of your playing and of your potential for expressing music that is not just merely virtuosic. Um, Terribly important. That in a Haydn sonata, if you don't have a proper slow movement, you don't get the opportunity to show that you can make a line.
Absolutely. I mean, there are some Haydn sonatas that just by virtue of the stylistic nature of the day, they don't afford you that opportunity.
Exactly.
So many schools ask for a prelude and fugue. Do you think that there are preludes and fugues that are better or worse choices?
Yeah, we're going to pick one in particular that I think we agree on. The E flat minor from Book One, which is a very slow and somber saraband-like prelude. It's a favorite for so many, but it is not necessarily a good choice. Why is that?
One of the problems is we have to listen to quite a lot of it to hear what we need to hear.
Indeed. Indeed. And that is a major problem with it. Mhm.
And so if you bring this prelude, you're burning a lot of audition time because we're really going to have to hear quite a substantial amount. You're burning a lot of audition time to show a smaller amount of what you're capable of doing.
It requires a level of musical depth that is sometimes not available to someone at the age of 17. Uh, I don't want to, be branded as the kind of person who says, "Oh, you're only ready to play a late Beethoven sonata when you're 50 or older."
Mhm.
And yet, and I I certainly don't believe that. I think you need to study them when you're a young person. But the the ability to truly express the depth of feeling and emotion of a piece like that particular Bach may not be available to you at that age.
What about other Bach preludes and fugues? Is there an advantage of going with, I don't know, book two versus book one?
I think book two is great if you can manage them. They're probably a bit more difficult in many ways.
Yeah, they're of more substantial scope. The fugues tend to be longer and a little bit more complex.
Yeah, but they show a great deal. So if you want to present one of them and you feel up for it as a player, go for it.
What about the first couple of preludes and fugues of book one?
Oh, I think we need to avoid the first one, the C major.
Mm,
It's almost too famous for words, and no, it doesn't. It's not really the way you want to present something. If you were just presenting the fugue, that might be okay,
mm.
but rarely is that given. Are you given that kind of choice? Usually, it's a prelude and fugue together.
It's to your advantage to pick a prelude and a fugue where both the prelude and the fugue show something about you that you value. We talked a little bit about Haydn and the benefit of making sure you choose a Haydn sonata with um, movements of some variety. Do you think there? I mean, we've got, depending on which edition you're using and how you count, we've got 50. We've got 50 odd Haydn sonatas. Do we have preferences among those? Do you think?
I would say that the second half of the set is probably preferable to present.
Sure. I mean, any of the last couple dozen.
I think that all of those would work fairly well. But again, look to make sure that you have a proper slow movement uh, that can be played in the audition.
And I don't think, assuming you've made that kind of a selection, I don't think we mind hearing a Haydn sonata that is less commonly played or that we know less well. It doesn't have to be one of the last six, for example.
I actually think that's a great advantage. I love hearing a sonata that I don't know as well.
What about Mozart? You know,
I think people are scared of Mozart. I
should
mean,
they be?
and I love to play Mozart, but it's a kind of a terrifying proposition. Um,
I guess I will share from personal experience. I auditioned for my master's with the last sonata, with the D major, and it was fine. But can I say auditioning with that piece is not a good idea?
you can. I agree, actually. Not this
Be-
canon that starts on the first page.
I mean, so not only do you have sort of, Mozartian exposure and clarity of texture, and you have this sort of sense of crystalline structure and everything is bare and exposed and you're sort of pianistically naked. But now you have sort of all this counterpoint, and all that can happen is you can fall off it.
Exactly. And
And
you don't get a lot of credit for doing it just perfectly and wonderfully.
so you have sort of the heightened exposure. I mean, it's a beautiful recital piece. It's a lot of fun, and if you fall off it in a recital, to some degree, who cares? You get back on the horse and you go on. But you fall off it in an audition. It's not a pleasant experience. So do as I say, not as I do. I don't.
No, I would follow you in that advice completely.
I don't think 576 is a great audition piece. It's a masterwork, but it's dangerous, and it feels like it just gives you the chance to fall flat on your face, or simply to reach expectation. But it's hard to have the opportunity to sort of rise above. Any other Mozart sonatas that are pitfalls?
Well, yeah, there are pitfalls everywhere, but let's just say not 545, the famous C major little
Yeah,
one. Um, that's not a good idea for an audition.
yeah.
I think probably the first five also might be eliminated, although I can imagine a performance of the third one or something. One of them, it's not a bad idea to put Mozart on your program at
Hmm.
all. Um, it shows so much. It shows your ability to balance a line, to listen well to what you're producing, to make a beautiful singing line. I mean, he was essentially thinking vocally in vocal terms during many of the compositions that he writes for the piano.
And I mean, there are sonatas that are, I think, just clearly great choices. I mean, the F major 332 or the B flat 333. The C minor is a great choice.
Wonderful.
Well, it's a Beethoven year, and Beethoven gets his own slide. Lots of sonatas there. Where are the dangers for a 17 or 18-year-old finishing up high school and wants to audition with a Beethoven sonata, do you think?
Well, I'm going to go for the juggler. Last five.
The last five. No late Beethoven?
Oh, not really.
Not even 109?
Oh, 109. Everyone loves 109. Well, yeah. I mean, it may seem accessible, but if somebody plays it really exceptionally well, of course, it'd be wonderful to hear.
You would be an atypical 17 or 18-year-old to be able to reach that.
Indeed, nicely put. It just is a little bit beyond the grasp of most people at that age. Uh,
I
uh,
mean, I think a 17-year-old stands a chance of personally resonating with something from Opus 31 better than they might for something beyond Opus 90.
I think those are great choices. Yeah, and Opus 90, by the way, is full of pitfalls. Um, but 31, especially number two, I mean, which is often played, but somehow I never get tired of hearing it in all.
Yeah, I think the Tempest is just fine. It shows up with some regularity. I don't get tired of hearing it.
I don't. It's there's so much there that you can hear, that you can learn about a student playing it, um, that it wears very very well. What about Les Adieux Sonata?
That can be challenging. I've seen it done well. It has two dangers. Danger one is the slow introduction, which we're probably going to have to hear all the way through. I mean, anything else would just be unfair. And that takes a while. And then once you get into the Allegro proper, there danger lies ahead.
Oh my! On that first page is miserable passages in the literature.
And yeah, we're going to hear through and we're going to wait and see how you handle that particular lick. And if you bring it, we know it's hard.
Yeah, yeah,
We hear it flubbed plenty of times. Chances are a bunch of us have flubbed it ourselves. That's how that goes. But why subject yourself to that?
indeed. What about some of the really famous ones, say the Patatique or the Moonlight Sonata?
In contrast to the Tempest, which seems to weather being heard over and over again just fine, I'm not sure bringing the Moonlight or the Pathétique is a really good choice. Um,
I think I agree with you on that. I get really tired of hearing the first movement of the Pathétique.
yeah, I don't mean to disparage Beethoven on his 250th birthday, and it's probable that this is not his fault. But if I never hear the first movement of the Moonlight again, I'll be okay.
Yeah, I mean, in a great performance, it is an experience to remember.
You've got me. I would gladly even actually pay money to hear the first movement of the Moonlight played really well. So I guess I'm inconsistent, but boy, it's been a long time.
Uh, Probably the first sonata should also not be on the list. I'm thinking, although the rest of Opus 2, I think, are terrific choices.
Yeah, Opus 2 number 1 probably not, but the A major is just fine. Opus 2 number 3 that shows a great deal and I think is accessible for a pianist going for a Bachelor of Music audition as well.
I think it is too, and it just shows so much pianistic command and all of that. Um, yeah,
There are some littler sonatas. I think we can agree that Opus 49 is probably not okay. What about Opus 79?
I would put it in the similar category, even though it's a charming piece. I mean, but it just doesn't show enough.
Some schools put Opus 14 in that category as well.
Yeah, um, personally, I don't mind hearing Opus 14, but that's my personal view.
Yeah, I incline to the same point of view. I mean, I think the Opus 14 number 1 shows plenty. It's a smaller piece, sure.
I prefer to hear the second one, frankly, the G major.
Hmm.
It's such a beautiful lyrical opening movement that I think it can show quite a lot if it's played really well.
Shall we move on to the romantics?
Let's do. Let's do.
So we're eliding uh, Schubert in our discussion here. Is that okay?
I think so. I mean, there are some very few Schubert pieces that work well, but I think for the most part, there are probably some better choices that can be made for this kind of setting, even though I am a huge Schubert fan.
No,
So,
me too. What about Chopin? Are there? Do we think there are good pieces? Do we think there are pitfalls? Are there pieces that should just be in the outbox for auditions?
I think there are a couple in the outbox. Uh, the Berceuse for starters, because it
Mm.
basically one texture throughout, one bass line throughout. Um, but also, I think and I know that students love to play these pieces, and so it might come it might come down hard on them to hear this. But I think both the second and the fourth ballades are problematic. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't never ever be played in an audition. Heavens, we're not saying that. But
The fourth ballade is curious in that it begins with this essentially a set of variations in F minor that that are gorgeous and beautiful and give you the opportunity to show what you're doing with line, what you're doing with voicing. They show us how you're handling the pedal on the piano that's in front of you. But this variation like structure goes on for about 4 minutes.
yeah, and that's a lot of the audition right there, isn't it?
And so you finally then get into the sort of the transition to the secondary area. And that's right about the point where the audition committee is looking at their watches and they're saying, okay, thank you very much.
Yes, yes.
If the audition goes well, they hear 2 minutes of this sort of slow variation structure. And they say, okay, why don't we hear the coda?
Yes.
But that's when it's gone well because they've heard enough. They want to hear more. They want to hear how you handle a coda. But boy, jumping directly to that coda, that's a technical burden right there. You want to work up to that a little bit.
So one should be forewarned that if you're deciding to play that particular work, this is what could happen. Yes, and that's the good news.
And if they don't, I mean, if they just hear 4.5 minutes of these variations and stop you at the beginning of the second theme, second ballade, similar problems, right?
It is indeed.
I would not like to be jumped to the coda of the second ballade.
Not really any better than being jumped to the code of the fourth. Maybe a little. It's marginally different.
What about the barcarolle?
Well, the barcarolle is a marvelous, marvelous work that if you have the chops for it, and I'm not just talking about the pianistic chops, but you have the musical ability to make a convincing performance of this piece, go for it. But boy, choose carefully.
I mean, when a student comes with that piece, we're all really interested to hear how you how you deal with the challenge of that first bass note and that first chord. I mean, these first two notes, they
Yes,
show so much.
they do.
And if you have a little bit of trouble with the piano, we'll forgive you. We know that's hard.
What about the scherzi?
Oh, I think the scherzi are all fine.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's true.
There have been occasions where in some of sort of the more repetitious A sections where we've asked a student to jump over one of the reprises and go to the trio, for example. And you should be expected to deal
That
with that sort of thing. What about the polonaises?
fine, especially some of them.
Hmm?
F sharp minor is, I think, a terrific audition piece.
What about something with a longer? We've talked about the problems of long introductions. What about something like the Polonaise Fantasy?
Well, you're going to be jumped in that piece probably too.
Yeah, I think the chances are pretty good. Or
It's just
another one with a long introduction, the Andante Spianato and Grand Polonaise.
probably not a great choice for similar issues. Very nice, long, beautiful andante that begins it, but it's all one particular kind of thing. And then you're in this super virtuosic polonaise.
Other big pieces. What about the fantasy? What about the sonatas?
Fine.
Yeah.
Great.
I mean, if you're preparing the sonatas, make sure you learn the whole sonata.
Oh, yeah.
Probably not the first sonata, but that's never happened.
That's not going to happen. Don't believe
Feels like an unlikely outcome. What about the preludes?
Fine, if you have a group, probably you need almost 10 minutes worth to make it viable, right?
Yeah,
Well, enough variety to show enough a number of facets in those particular short works.
yeah, and when you bring a group like that, I mean, there's some chance we're going to jump you around there as well. So you don't want to get accustomed to playing your 10 minutes of prelude straight through. We might hear 16 and then skip to something else. That would be a little nasty, but it could happen.
but but that's absolutely true. And so again, be forewarned.
Generally speaking, I don't feel like the waltzes are great choices as
Yeah.
audition pieces. There's not enough scope and enough variety there to show us what we need to see. What about nocturnes? I feel like that might be a bit more mixed.
I think it is too, but I think the Great C Minor Nocturne is such a standalone work that it can be well presented in a audition situation. But the others may need to be coupled with something else in order to make to kind of give the opposite side of of things, so to speak. To
Yeah, show us some romantic variety, and if a nocturne is part of that, great.
yeah, sure. Should we venture forth and talk about Schumann a little bit?
Let's start with the first couple of opuses. How about Abeg? How about Papillon?
Terrific.
Yeah,
Happy
yeah.
to hear those.
They show a great deal and they show it quickly.
Yes, exactly. That's true. So that
But interestingly, except for I'm thinking of a couple of the variations in Abeg, which still give me nightmares. The, there's the opportunity to settle into the instrument a little bit as well. I mean, they're not
yes,
Abeg and Papillon are not bad. Not if you're comfortable with them and you're in shape. These are not bad pieces to start a program with. Is there risky Schumann?
yes. I think Kinderszenen is problematic. There's so much musical depth required to play that piece really satisfyingly too. What about the fantasy pieces, Opus 12?
That's that's interesting. I, I sometimes get asked the question of whether Aufschwung is going to be okay. I'd probably say not by itself, and I would have concerns. But there are numbers from Opus 12 that are probably fine as part of a larger suite of romantic offerings.
What other things do we avoid in the Romantic era?
If we were to jump to Mendelssohn, I think I probably wouldn't be bringing the Rondo Capriccioso for an undergraduate audition.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Part of it is it's sort of overplayed.
Yes, exactly.
The Andante isn't that long. I don't know that the slow introduction is really the problem here.
It's just the over familiarity, the over exposure of a particular work.
And when it shows up in an audition, it's often one of those pieces that the student's been playing for a very long time. Is other Mendelssohn okay? I mean, could we imagine the Fantasy or the Variation Series?
I think those are fabulous. Prelude and Fugue can be fabulous too, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, if someone came with the E minor Prelude and Fugue, that would be wonderful.
That'd be wonderful. So there's a lot out there that can be chosen.
And the Variations are a fantastic freshman audition piece.
Oh
They
yeah.
show so much.
Oh yeah. I mean, just by their very nature. I mean, it's a short theme, and then he's off and running, and each variation offers a new world or connects with the previous one and into another world. So it's just marvelous, marvelous set of pieces.
What about Liszt?
I think there's some definite issues with Liszt. Maybe we'll start with the outbox. Un Sospiro.
Yeah, Un Sospiro's a little bit of a problem. I mean, the good stuff happens too late in the piece, and there's no easy way to jump you there either. So we have to listen to all the stuff that comes before that, and that's not a good use of audition time. What about the Hungarian Rhapsodies? These can actually be quite popular freshman audition pieces. They have an appeal. It's easy to resonate with the musicality and drama happening in a Hungarian Rhapsody.
That's a terrific choice, actually. Fine, but you have to be up for the pianistic challenges,
Oh
right?
yeah.
And so if you're overreaching, yeah, you don't want to be playing that piece.
Yeah,
And
make sure you're able to play the piece.
exactly, and you'll be skipped to the Friska part anyway, so you can pretty much count on that. What about transcendental etudes or concert etudes, if we're talking about etudes?
I think well, I mean, I think they're all fine. I think the problem then is make sure you're picking an etude that's within your reach. Lists demands are pretty expansive, and you want to make sure you've got it nailed down, and it's not something you're struggling to get through.
One of the transcendental etudes that I think we both feel this way about is the F minor, which sometimes when I hear people come to grief over.
It's very popular. That shows up as a freshman audition piece quite frequently, and often isn't a good choice.
Yeah.
We don't want you to give yourself tendinitis overreaching in a less transcendental etude because you feel it's some kind of expectation for an audition.
Very nicely put, and I'm sure that will be noticed by people watching this.
So let's, as you suggested, though, move on, and we're committing the crime here of skipping over late romantics, most notably Brahms.
Right.
Shall we disclaim that at all?
Yeah, we should. Well, again, it's a little bit problematic. I mean, if you're presenting, I suppose you could present the Opus 5 Sonata. My goodness, it's an enormous work. But I would be shocked to see it in an undergraduate
I'm
audition.
trying to think if I've ever seen someone present all of Opus 5 as a freshman audition. I don't think I've seen that yet, but it could happen.
Otherwise, you're kind of doomed with the short pieces. Some of the short pieces, anyway.
Mm.
Not entirely. I mean, there are other choices, but I think possibly once again there might be better. And I'm speaking as a real Brahmsian. I adore
Mm.
Brahms, but I think there might be better choices for an undergraduate audition.
So we move then, as we allied to the very end of the 19th century, to Debussy and Ravel. Um, and these are really, really common audition pieces. Do you think there are perils or hazards associated with these guys?
Of course, there are. Judo is a popular piece for people of this age group, and I think it creates some problems. It is overplayed. Um, and you can hurt yourself by not meeting some of the interpretational expectations that might be present on a committee. That's as gently as I want to put it, I suppose.
Yeah, and your opportunities to show you in the piece are pretty small.
Indeed.
You have the danger of that black key gliss with and boy, some audition pianos have really sharp black keys. Often the biggest challenge with this period of repertoire, and I don't think this is a reason why you shouldn't play it. I think you should just go in with open eyes, is adapting to the pedal
Yes.
and figuring out the pedal on the piano in the room.
So if you're a student who is perhaps not as adept with your pedaling and not as quick to adapt, maybe this is not the best repertoire for you. But it is also very, very beautiful
Oh
writing for
yeah.
piano, and you can show a lot if it's something that you feel comfortable playing and comfortable adapting to in an audition situation.
This I mean this is good advice generally anyway, but for this rep particularly, boy, you want to make sure you've had experience playing it on a whole bunch of different pianos,
In
including bad ones.
yes, matter of fact, bad ones are essential.
Hmm. Generally speaking, if you're in a situation where the only instruments you ever play are the piano you have at home and the piano your teacher has, that's not a good idea.
Not enough preparation for playing Debussy or Ravel.
But let's jump back to Debussy. How do we feel about Image?
I think Image are great. I don't have any problem with either set of Image.
Yeah, they're all beautiful pieces that show a great deal. If you bring book two, again, no guarantees, but be prepared to be asked for Poisson d'Or. Uh, the odds are good.
Yes. You might actually be asked for And the Moon Descends, the second movement, because it requires such refined ability to listen and to connect very sparsely one chord and one melody note to another.
I've always felt that there's a nice kismet about being able to be part of an audition panel and to ask for the moon. The but no, actually, I not for that reason. I would probably ask for that one, just because of what it shows. I would probably rather hear it than the goldfish, but I may be in a minority.
Depends on what else has been offered on the audition.
Exactly. Uh, what about the Debussy preludes?
I think those are fine as long as you have, again, a kind of, you know, enough of them. You have to
Yeah.
have several that show different things, maybe 10 minutes worth at least.
Pour le piano?
Or the piano is a great piece.
Yeah.
It's very well.
What about Estampe?
I think Estampe is terrific too. Um, and it shows a great deal.
Hmm.
I think maybe I prefer the homage, but that's personal.
Hmm. I've seen it a few times where a student brings Estampe and requests to begin with it, and certainly a student will learn a lot about what a piano can do and how to deal with the pedal by beginning with Pagode. And
Right,
if you handle that well, that will work in your favor.
of course. Yeah.
If we continue with Ravel, is the sonatine a baby piece? It's just a little sonata, and so we shouldn't bring it?
Absolutely not. It's a great piece. It works wonderfully in an audition.
Oh
Shows,
yeah,
shows a great deal.
yeah. It's not baby Ravel at all.
Not,
It's
not at all.
a fantastic piece that shows a great deal. What about the big sets? I mean, we talked about Alvarada. In Miroir, are there other pieces that are reasonable to bring?
I think probably the Un bar sur le Sion is a fine audition piece. Both of these pieces are very, very difficult pianistically. So you really have to be on top of your game.
Hmm.
But yeah. But as far as the rest go, not so sure. Not so sure.
What about Gaspard? Can you bring Ondine by itself?
Yes, I think so.
I think so too. What about Le Gibet? Would you bring that by itself?
Absolutely not.
I don't think anyone's ever tried it. I mean, who
I've
would
never
want
heard of it happening. But
who would want to? It feels unlikely. Scarbo's been offered by itself, and that's fine.
I think so too.
We're going to ask for it.
Oh, yeah, you can almost be assured. Again, don't blame us if they don't,
Yeah.
but it probably will be asked for.
So if we move more solidly into the 20th century, one pitfall is so common that I've put it on the slide here to highlight it because it happens, I think, more often than we'd like. Please don't pick some token modern piece. Pick a piece you really like.
Yeah, that you can get behind, that you feel convinced about, and convince an audience that you feel a certain way about this piece.
So if we go to sort of some of the big 20th century composers that often show up, where do we stand with Prokofiev? Are there pieces that are good choices or less so?
I think so. I think there are a lot of good choices, actually. Any of the early sonatas are fine. 1, 2, or 3 work just fine. Again, if you're playing 2, you want to have 4 movements. But that's a large scale work.
Prokofiev is a composer where we were talking about the barber before. Prokofiev is a composer where often a student will volunteer like just a movement of a sonata, and I think, and I can't speak to every school, but
Right.
I think it is our preference, and it's probably a good aesthetic choice anyway. If you're learning a sonata, bring the whole thing, and if you're even if it's a Prokofiev sonata, bring the whole piece.
Yeah. Yeah. Just have it ready to go.
So you said 1, 2, and 3. What about 4?
4 is weird. It's.
What? Those notebooks are too old?
I think so. I think the pages have been yellowing for a while. It's got some beauties in it, but I think as a piece of music, it doesn't cohere in the same way that the earlier sonatas do, and it's.
Well, it brings some of the interpretive questions that we've raised with 109, that we've raised with Schubert. Boy, it's rough. I mean,
Going, yeah.
to interpretatively wrap your head around what's going on in number 4, that's pretty brutal. Um, 5 and 9 don't show up that commonly. The war sonatas, it's not unusual for a student to bring those. Are those okay?
Yes, if you can play the whole thing.
Yeah, they're
Uh,
big pieces.
People will sometimes play seven. They'll just do the last movement. They'll just do the toccata movement. And
Yeah, I think we'd like the whole piece.
I think we need the whole piece for that. I mean, it's again, it's one thing. It's even though the perfect toccata is one thing. Is that okay? I mean, the freestanding Opus 11 toccata.
Um, oh yeah. Yeah, I think the toccata is just fine.
I think so too.
It's short enough. It shows boy, it shows plenty, and it shows it pretty quickly. And it's short enough. I mean, the piece, depending on what tempo you play it at, and there's a variety of interpretations. But it's somewhere between 4 and a bit and 6 and a bit minutes long. And they'll probably stop you
Yeah,
unless they've got time. And it shows a lot quickly.
yeah, it does. It does. What other?
The
Go ahead.
um, what about some of the other smaller pieces, the sarcasms or the Romeo and Juliet suite?
Well, for my money, both of those are good.
Yeah,
I really like the sarcasms. I think Romeo and Juliet pieces are terrific. You'd bring more than one,
yeah,
and you might want to bring those Montagues and Capulets along.
yeah. And chances are pretty good that's the one we hear, but there are no guarantees.
That's right.
What about the pieces in Opus 2?
Those are good. I mean, they're very impressive. Those etudes.
Mm,
They get the job done. They show a lot of command of the instrument.
sure.
Um, Opus 12.
Um, Opus 12 feels like it's not quite sufficient. It doesn't show enough of what we're looking for. What about Scriabin?
Well, if you're going to pick Scriabin, what about picking an etude?
Oh, I think choices from Opus 8 can be really, really wonderful, and show us a lot about musicality and technique and color, all of that simultaneously. In fact, all of Scriabin shows a great deal of color, often very quickly.
Yes, it does indeed. He was thinking in terms of color very strongly.
Yeah,
Not that others aren't, but yes. What about Opus 42? I think those are also some pretty terrific and demanding etudes.
yeah, absolutely. I think those are fine. What about the sonatas?
Get into some more problematic.
Hmm.
I would say for me anyway. I think we want to avoid certainly all the late sonatas.
From 6 on,
Pretty much.
yeah, octotonic Scriabin is a little rough for a 17 or 18-year-old, I think.
Generally speaking, I mean, there might be one who can pull off number nine. I don't know, but maybe. But I generally avoid those. I think two and three are the safest bets of the sonata repertoire of his. But
What about Bartok?
Bartok has some wonderful things that I think are highly effective for an undergraduate audition. The Suite Opus 14, I think, is a marvelous work that shows a lot in very little time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
It's the play, right? So,
Yeah.
and that's all four movements of it.
Um, I think the six dances in Bulgarian rhythm at the end of Mikrokosmos are all fine, and there's a lot of stuff in Book 6 that you might want to bring. I would bring I would bring a selection. I wouldn't bring just one.
Oh heavens, no! They're like a minute and a half.
Mm.
So yes, but a selection out of Microcosmos 6 is terrific. The six dances at the end, terrific. Yeah,
We've occasionally had a freshman auditionee show up with the sonata, which I I think the sonata is a great piece.
it is a great piece. It is really difficult.
Yeah,
It is really difficult.
and again, you'd want to bring the whole thing.
Yes, yes. What about out of doors?
I think a similar kind of situation, and actually, I think with out of doors, you'd probably want to bring the whole thing too.
I think you need to. I think you need to. What about Copland Variations? Another mainstay of the American repertoire.
I think the Copeland variations are an absolutely incredible piece. Um, I don't know that they're a great audition piece because they can be unexpectedly divisive. There is a level of volume that Copeland asks for on the first page of the variations that is, it's tough to moderate down. And so sort of getting through that theme and the first variation or so at the level of forte that he's asking for, it's a little brutalist.
Yeah, a committee sitting right next to the piano might feel that it's assaultive.
Um, and so it's not necessarily the best choice, which pains me because
Yeah,
I adore the piece, but I don't know that it's a piece that plays well in an audition. A popular piece for teenagers to learn is Cat and Mouse. Is that appropriate as a freshman audition piece?
it's a charming piece.
Hmm.
I wouldn't mind hearing it. I don't know how you feel about
I
it.
think it can't hurt if you play it with charm. It shows some things. A more recent piece with set of pieces with some popularity are Lowell Lieberman's Gargoyles.
Yeah,
Um, uh, these are played quite a lot these days. Sometimes students offer the full set. Sometimes they just offer one or two. Um, do you feel like these offer a student the chance for audition success?
um, I think they can, but you really have to be able to embrace the musicality that is required to play them,
Yeah.
not just play them like a cowboy.
In an audition setting,
Yeah.
I wonder if their popularity works in their favor. Because
I worry that it doesn't, but that's personal. Yeah.
so we have some sense then of sort of the scope of repertoire and choices in terms of repertoire. We're moving into a world where in the coming year auditions are likely to look very different. Um, we don't know what the future holds, but anyone who's planning to audition for schools in the coming year has potential challenges lying ahead of them.
I think they do, and it's going to be interesting to see how different schools will meet these challenges.
Hmm.
I'm sure there's not going to be a one size fits all.
Sometimes when you do sort of live video conferencing, you can't get the audio quality exactly where you want it in the way you might be able to with a recording. And I think trying to figure out this balance of seeing the realness of live,
Yeah,
and seeing the polish and quality of recorded, there are things that are offered at both ends of that, and you'll see schools playing with that balance.
yeah. Well, it fills in the blanks a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Otherwise, there are blanks. You don't know really what you're listening to often when you're hearing a recorded performance. How many takes it took them to get to that particular place, uh, or whatever.
When you send recordings for auditions, though, it's worth bearing in mind that an audition committee, when they're evaluating recordings, we are, and we all have, lots of schools do pre-screening, and recorded auditions are in one way or another are part of sort of classical music education life. We are assuming that you are sending your best take,
Yes, of course.
and we're assuming that you've had the chance to give multiple takes, and so it's different from a live audition where you show up in the room, we understand the pressures you've been under all day, and we understand what's going on. When you send us a recorded audition, we know you've had the chance to go back and do it again. So it's been a real pleasure for us to
Certainly.
talk through this audition process and talk through the selection of repertoire, and we certainly hope it's been useful for you.
Yes, I really enjoyed the whole process, David. And lovely bouncing things off of you and hearing your opinions. And
Yeah, it's a delight, and it's nice to be able to put this out there. We didn't get to see you in Chicago, but maybe we'll see you all at the next MTNA conference.
fingers crossed. That would be really wonderful if we could all be back together.
Very cool. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.